Today we're going to be talking about Mary Jane Watson.
Mary Jane Watson.
No, not that one. Or 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 that one. Show me the real Mary Jane.
Perfection.
You may know her as the main love interest of Peter Parker and one of the most iconic love interests in general. Though, I guess with all the negativity around her, maybe some people question that. I want to take you through a little backstory here about my exposure to Mary Jane Watson and why I think that I've never actually seen her in a video game, cartoon, movie, even though she's had such an overabundance of appearances in video games, cartoons, and movies, and why I don't think that even in the comics she is currently appearing now. Now, I had a different introduction to Mary Jane Watson than I think most people in the modern day would, because my first exposure to her was the comics, the original 60s Spider-Man comics written by Stan Lee, Jerry Conway, all of those people. I think that most people probably were first introduced to her from the 90s Spider-Man cartoon or Spectacular Spider-Man or the Raimi Spider-Man films. I had the luxury of actually not growing up with any of those things, as I didn't get into superheroes until my teen years, and I didn't watch the Raimi Spider-Man films until after I had started reading Spider-Man comics purely out of curiosity. I had actually seen the Amazing Spider-Man films first. But getting into original comics, I was very hyped up to see the first appearance of this girl, Mary Jane Watson, from her very first Face It Tiger, You Just Hit the Jackpot, very famous panel. And when I read these Spider-Man comics, I not only really enjoyed reading about Peter Parker's personal life, but I absolutely loved Mary Jane Watson. And why? Mary Jane was a firecracker of a character. Maybe that isn't even the right word for it. She was very different than the other love interests in comics. In fact, Mary Jane Watson, when she began, was a subversion of the typical superhero love interest trope. Typically in comics or media, you would have the love interest of a superhero character be the person behind the scenes to give them heartache, to not understand why they were disappearing all the time, to never really be able to know the identity of the hero and never be able to reconcile that double life. Of course, this was no strange thing to Peter Parker. His first love interest in comics was actually Betty Brant. His second love interest at this time was Gwen Stacy, who a lot of people seem to think is the better love interest for Peter Parker, but that isn't true at all. Gwen Stacy was very much the stereotypical girlfriend character in comics. She seemed like a match for Peter Parker on the outset because she was also a sciencey person like him. She was very intelligent, but she was gorgeous and didn't have the people problems or the friendship problem that he had. It just seemed like a perfect match if only ever Peter could get up the courage to actually talk to her, actually work out their problems, and reconcile that double life with Spider-Man. But none of this was the case when Mary Jane Watson came on the screen. Mary Jane, unlike a lot of other people in Spider-Man's cast, loved superheroes. She loved Spider-Man. She was also adventurous. While other people would run away from danger in the comics, Mary Jane would run to it. She would love to watch it. Mary Jane was once again the complete subversion of the typical superhero girlfriend trope. She was not just the typical obvious choice for the lead, a demure girl who is everything that the hero could want if only they could just reconcile this superhero double life. She was an excitable partier who seemed to be everything that Peter Parker could ever want, a girl who literally seems fine with him running off with no explanation. So this was a brand new, exciting character for the comics, and very different from different superhero love interests that we've seen in the past. But it couldn't all be perfect with Mary Jane Watson. You see, Peter Parker, as he soon finds out, while it's great to have Mary Jane around because she doesn't care if he disappears, she doesn't care if he disappears. More and more, Peter just saw Mary Jane's carefree attitude, not caring if he skipped out on dates or didn't show up or disappeared, as making him wonder, does she actually care about him at all? And what he would find out is that Mary Jane Watson was actually very non-committal to relationships. She would date casually, she would hang out with friends, she would party, but she never wanted to belong to anyone. She never wanted to actually commit to a relationship. And that was true when he was kind of casually dating her and when she went and casually dated Harry. In fact, sometimes Peter would interpret Mary Jane's behavior as her being an airhead, like she doesn't care about anything but herself and her partying, and that's why she was too good to be true in just totally being accepting of his secret superhero lifestyle. And for a while there was that mystique over Mary Jane Watson. She didn't seem like a bad person at all. She didn't seem like she didn't like Peter or didn't care about her friends, but she was very aloof in that sense. And this was because at the time, Mary Jane Watson still was not considered Peter Parker's main love interest. Mary Jane Watson was actually conceived as a rival to Gwen Stacy, the party girl, the mysterious girl, the one with maybe a little bit more of an edge compared to the good, innocent girl the hero is supposed to end up with. But all of that would change because sooner or later they ran out of stories to tell with Peter Parker and your more good girl Gwen Stacy, who never really reconciled with Peter Parker's double life or truly found out what it was all about. In the famous arc Death of Gwen Stacy, where Gwen is killed in a fight with Green Goblin after snapping her neck when Peter tries to save her. I don't need to go into how this changed comics and to have such a major character be killed off, but this is the turning point where Mary Jane Watson finally became Peter Parker's main love interest. And from there, the relationship evolved. It had always been kind of interesting between Peter and MJ. This is the nerdy guy who can't get a date and the absolute firecracker of a girl who loves partying, is super extroverted, is super confident, or so it would seem. She was not the obvious choice as a love interest for Peter. She was very much created to be the other woman, the rival, the person who he ultimately wouldn't end up with. But now, since they had killed off Gwen Stacy after not knowing what to do with her relationship with Peter, we get this very different relationship between Peter and MJ, the less obvious one, the one with, frankly, a lot more chemistry as they have those contrasts in character. And of course, it would be many, many years before Peter and MJ actually tied the knot, and a lot more development from there. Development deepening MJ's character. Once again, these two just had the perfect chemistry finally. It wasn't Peter Parker and boring old stereotypical Gwen Stacy, who was just very much the cookie-cutter girlfriend of a superhero. It was Peter Parker and partier, originally a beatnik MJ. But of course, there were still issues because Mary Jane still didn't want to belong to anyone, and that still created problems with her commitment to Peter, even as she would be more supportive as she decided to be after the death of Gwen Stacy. And not to give you a crash course in all of comics, but it is eventually revealed that Mary Jane has known that Peter Parker is Spider-Man all this time, which seamlessly connected why she was fine and even seemed to open the door for him to go out and do his Spider-Man work that seemed all too good to be true for Peter. We eventually find out why Mary Jane is so aloof. Mary Jane really is not what she seems. She is not the extroverted party girl. Mary Jane Watson comes from an abusive family, and her entire life she had an abusive father. She's gone from home to home, and there has been a lot of family conflict and a lot of misery at home. And the way that she would deal with that is by putting a smile on her face, pretending to be the party girl so that no one, not her own family, the people at school, or anyone would know who she really is and know how pained she is on the inside. She doesn't want to commit to a relationship because she's seen her own family, whether it's her parents or her sister, get into relationships where things turned abusive and completely fell apart. That kind of aloofness and that protection of herself has also managed for her to make her own selfish decisions in the process. A lot like Peter Parker, a guy who started out as someone who also got bullied a lot in high school, became very temperamental, had a hard time with relationships, and wears a mask over it all. Peter and MJ both have that flaw of selfishness, and they're both trying to be better people, and they both help each other be better people in the end. And once they come to an understanding about each other, and Peter finally knows who Mary Jane was all along and all these secrets that she has shared, that evolves into them getting married and having a very complementary relationship. So this is a very good relationship to read about because they both have their differences that bring about that chemistry and that interesting dynamic, but they also have that understanding and that similarity that makes them the best person for each other. They understand their flaws. They're both trying to be better as people, but there's also a very fascinating chemistry to it. That is the relationship between Peter Parker and Mary Jane Watson, and it wasn't obvious. It developed organically. It developed developed because it really was the best relationship Peter Parker could have. It developed not because Mary Jane was tailor-made for Peter and as the obvious choice, but because she was ultimately the right choice for his character all along. That is Mary Jane Watson and why I love the character. Now, why haven't we ever seen her in an adaptation? When I watched the Raimi Spider-Man movies first, I noticed Mary Jane is nothing like she was in the comics. She's Kirsten Dunst. She's got the abusive backstory they don't really go into. She doesn't have that firecracker personality that she does in the comics. She doesn't have that aloofness as she does in the comics. She does not have any of the wild party girl elements masking off the mystique of her real life and home and the selfishness. I mean, there are things that she does that are selfish and people have really called out, but the movie doesn't really portray her that way. Mary Jane is very much the stereotypical screaming, personality-less love interest in the Raimi Spider-Man films. We've gotten so many versions of MJ at this point, and none of them are like that wonderful chemistry between her and Peter in the comics, or that wonderful character that was just great on her own. I think it started with the 90s Spider-Man cartoon, actually, that a lot of people grew up with, where Mary Jane was pretty much just reduced to the stereotypical girlfriend who doesn't know that the lead is actually Spider-Man and can't contend with their double lives. And there's been so many cartoons, once again. Spectacular on paper is trying to make her more like that version of MJ from the comics, but it still doesn't go there. She still does not have that rambunctious personality. She wants to be a free agent, but none of the personality that made her up in the comics is there. Neither is it in the Into the Spider-Verse movies when we see her. She just seems very much like the stereotypical wife character, once again, the soft-spoken, supportive one. None of that personality. There's a reason why Mary Jane is a model and an actress in the comics. She is a bombshell. She not only looks like it, but she acts like it, but we've never seen that in the movies. In Ultimate Spider-Man, she was reimagined as being more of a best friend to Peter, but once again, none of that personality. In the Insomniac games, I don't hate that version as other people do. I'm talking about the first game, but she is literally made into the stereotypical girlfriend, once again, literally making her a reporter like Lois Lane. And then in the MCU films, MJ is just a completely different character entirely. There was apparently original plans to say that she came from an abusive home, and that's why she's so aloof. There is that aloofness, but obviously none of that bombshell personality or look, none of that rambunctiousness, which is literally core to the character and literally makes a parallel life between her and Peter in terms of them masking themselves, and literally made her a more interesting, likable character. And these days, it almost seems like there's an attempt, there literally is an attempt to make people not like Mary Jane anymore. Perhaps not in the Insomniac games, but in the comics. They've punted her off with Paul so that now she's in love with a completely different character, and that personality the character used to have has been completely lost for many years now. They're not just making her more stereotypical, they're making her more of like a knife in the heart of Peter, with how she's abandoned him for Paul, and how she just seems more and more of an unlikable character in general. Marvel Comics doesn't want you to like Mary Jane Watson because they believe Mary Jane Watson is a threat to Peter Parker's character, because she was representative of his growth in the past, and they don't want him to grow. They want these storylines to be told at the status quo forever, and that's why there seems to be an active attempt to make people not even like the character of Mary Jane Watson anymore, and make Peter Parker have other love interests so that no one will be complaining about the good old days where Peter Parker actually had character growth when he was with Mary Jane Watson. And that's a very sad thing, because Mary Jane Watson was a wonderful character, and one that I still have yet to see on screen, still have yet to see that development with Peter Parker. She isn't Peter Parker's main love interest because she's Peter Parker's main love interest, which is how she's made out to be. She is because she evolved into the perfect match for him, both in terms of the chemistry and how interesting it was, and because of their backstory and the problems, the issues that they personally both had to deal with, and that they both helped each other deal with. One of my favorite moments with these two, where it actually seemed to be getting more serious between them, whether Mary Jane wanted that or not because of her own fear, is actually this scene when Peter Parker asked Mary Jane Watson why she calls him Tiger. Tiger. And she says, I call you Tiger because you're not. And that is the perfect representation of what Peter and Mary Jane's relationship was. Mary Jane is the bombshell firecracker who sees that Peter Parker is a nerd, but also sees all of the great aspects about him, and so she calls him Tiger because it's ironic, but it's also an affectionate term. She really likes him. It's just that perfect chemistry between the two. These days, when they make Mary Jane call Peter Tiger, it doesn't make any sense. She called him that in the past because that was like 60s slang. She was a beatnik character. She was a party girl, and she was calling that Peter Parker Tiger because he was the opposite of that. When they try to throw it in her character now, it doesn't make sense coming from her because she's just this normal girl like all the other love interests are.
Go get him, Tiger.
There's kind of this misconception at this point that Gwen Stacy is the more interesting love interest for Peter. That's just because she was given better writing and better chemistry with Peter in the Amazing Spider-Man movies with Emma Stone. Gwen Stacy is a boring character in comics. I'm just saying that in a world where every character can come back from the dead, there is a reason why Gwen Stacy has stayed dead. No, Mary Jane Watson is the greatest love interest for Spider-Man and a great character on her own as well. And I really miss seeing her. And I don't know if it's because they've been wanting to take her down because they don't want Peter Parker to grow, or just because characters become lost over the years. But this is my little PSA of remembering the character of Mary Jane Watson and hoping that one day we will actually get to see her on screen or even in the comics again. That's all I got for you guys today. Thank you guys for watching. I have a playlist of short films if you want to check that out. Get my latest short film to 5,000 views if you please. And if you want to support my work here, you can check out the link to my Patreon in the description, as these other patrons have gratefully done. And I will see you guys next time.